Welcome to the panel, Digital Compliance Visionaries, Driving Innovation with Analytics and Automation. Thank you to Ethisphere for organizing this timely panel. Today, I'm joined by three true ethics and compliance visionaries who are each well along their own paths of digitally transforming their compliance programs. And we're going to hear from each of them today about their visions around digital transformation, specifically focused on automation and data analytics. They're going to share some real practical insights on where they are today on their digital transformation journeys and their plans for the next 2 to 3 years. And we really hope that you'll each get some real practical advice from fellow practitioners on how both to start on that digital transformation journey, and if you've already started, how to accelerate that digital transformation journey. So with that, we wanted to start first with some introductions to turn it over to our first esteemed panelist, Natalia. If you could start with an introduction.
Hi, Parth. Thanks so much and great to be with everyone today. Again, my name is Natalia Shahade, and I am the Chief Integrity Officer for ABB based in Zurich, Switzerland.
Great. Mauricio?
Hello, everybody. Hello, panelists and attendees. Pleasure to be here today. My name is Mauricio Almar, and I'm the Managing Counsel and Senior Director for Global Investigations and Compliance at Halliburton, based in Houston, Texas.
Great. Thanks, Mauricio. And Will, how about you?
Great, Parth. Thanks. Will Simmons. I'm the head of global investigations and associate director for Lonza's ethics and compliance program, and we're based out of Basel.
Great. Thanks, Will. And I'm Parth Chanda. I'm the founder and CEO of Lextegrity, former in-house compliance lawyer, now CEO of Lextegrity, which is a software company focused on risk management, technology, data analytics, automation. So really great pleasure for me to be here today and to moderate this wonderful panel. So before we dive in, I did want to provide a disclaimer on behalf of all four of us today, that the views, statements expressed today are our own, not views or statements of our respective employers. And with that, one final housekeeping note, at any point, please do engage with us, put any questions in the chat. If you want to talk about other topics, we'll engage over the chat. We'll also save some time at the end for Q&A. So with that, let's dive in. So first, maybe Natalia, I'd love to pose to each of you, but maybe Natalia, you can start, just a threshold question. So at a high level, can you share some of your perspectives on kind of the overarching promise of digital transformation and the ethics and compliance function for you, and your company?
Sure. I think overall it's efficiency. We want to be able to work as efficiently as possible for the business, and that means responding timely to their needs, and also the efficiency of getting all of the members of our legal and integrity family, if you will, of professionals, focus their time on the highest value add work. And we think digital transformation has a huge role to play in that mission.
Great, thanks. Will, can I turn to you?
I think the efficiency is the absolute key there, and we want to make things as simple and practical as possible. I'm pretty sure everybody on here would agree that there's not that unlimited budget resources in the ethics and compliance space. So the more you can get a force multiplier by digitalizing and moving it forward, you're really going to be able to streamline your process and function. That does two things. It helps the in-house professionals that are doing the ethics and compliance, but it makes the relationship with your employees a lot easier because they have the resources immediately right there. And it just really is a force multiplier in terms of allowing you to target and streamline your approach to what the business risks are.
Great, thanks, Will. How about you, Mauricio?
And now I will sound like a broken record and say efficiency as well is a primary goal of automation, digitalization, but also focusing on accessibility and transparency for all stakeholders within the organization. Moving out of the siloed approach, which we have been in for quite some time, and making information easier to access, easier to digest, and easier to use for all stakeholders within the organization, wherever they may be sitting. And particularly as we see what the last year has done to the business environment and where we may move in the future, that ability to access information, data, and transact with it from any location has become even more important than perhaps it was even just 12 months ago.
Yeah, no, great. So wonderful. Thanks for that kind of high level, those high level views from each of you. So we're going to dive into obviously all of those pieces over the next hour or so. So I want to start first with kind of the highest touch area of the compliance program, which is process. So that's all of the things that touch your employees day to day, that are sometimes seen as burdensome, maybe bureaucratic. Think all of your processes around gifts, third-party diligence, conflicts, code certifications, etc. When you think about digital transformation, when it comes to the world of your processes, can you each share a little bit more in terms of the vision of applying digital transformation to those processes? Maybe
Sure.
Maurice, maybe we could start.
Yeah, no, happy to jump in. I would question bureaucracy. Why do you say that what we do is, no, in all seriousness. So obviously over the last decade, if not more, we've all created very strong, very robust, very process-oriented policies, procedures, approval methods, etc. And now we need to pivot to make that more accessible, more efficient, more digestible for stakeholders within the organization. And at least for us, a big component of that, and I'll kind of focus on one small area of it, is the mobile accessibility. So you reference gifts and entertainment, but even third-party approvals or other things that we're doing. We live in a mobile world. We live in a very fast-paced environment. And one of the things that we have deployed in the last year with your help, Parth, is being able to bring that closer to the internal stakeholders on a mobile basis, and being able to use that technology to more quickly and efficiently seek approvals, review requests, and move the business forward without suffering through what had historically been a very bureaucratic and cumbersome process.
Great. Natalia, do you want to jump in?
I would just add leverage. So we talked about the efficiencies. I think the digitization and automation of processes provide the leverage opportunity, right? And we'll talk about more in terms of data availability of that leverage. But I think that's key. I would also say we're trying to be very thoughtful in not just automating bureaucratic process, but rather in the pivot to digitization, really thinking thoughtfully about what do we have that is value add and how can it be made more efficient? What might be going on that is not value add from a process perspective? And for goodness sakes, do not spend the money to automate that. Think about just doing away with that low value process. And is there something that will give us better leverage in a digital format to give us greater insight into risk, into behavior, into the health of our enterprise culture?
Wonderful. Will, do you want to add anything to that?
Just a couple thoughts following on Natalia. I think that's a great thing. Just because you have a process or procedure in place does not mean you need to automate that. And if you back away from that and you start looking at what is truly value add, you may find that processes and procedures you have are not effective, they're not efficient, or they're giving you data that you just don't need, or you're not going to action on across the board. So I just caution that as you're going through this, it's an evaluation of the processes and the procedures in totality. And if there's not value add, okay, let's see is there something else we could capture it. But just creating something for the sake of creating something and say, look, it's automated, that's great, that's fine. But you need to make sure that it's actually being a force multiplier and giving you value for it and streamlining a process, and then giving you data that's actually usable. So you don't have this collection of all these points where, guess what, you're not doing anything with it. It's not driving the business forward. It's just creating another repository of a bunch of stuff that doesn't help with the business at all.
Yeah, I think those are all wonderful points, and very kind of the underlying premise of kind of user-centric approach to compliance. For at least from my experience in-house, like the business often, they know what processes actually work, where there's a value add. They're not necessarily compliance professionals by training, but they understand risk, and they often give you some great feedback in terms of where your own processes can be leveraged in a way that lets them do their job more easily, but at the same time satisfies what you're trying to achieve. So I kind of love all of those points. And Mauricio, your point of really meeting your business where they are, which is obviously increasingly mobile, is obviously a key part of that. So So that's the business. So we've talked about the business side. Let's maybe turn now to your side of the house, or at least the control function side. So compliance, audit, investigations, and the other functions that you either lead or deal with on a regular basis. All of these processes also produce a lot of data for you, risk data. Today, unfortunately, in many organizations, that's very siloed. That data is sitting often in separate places, an investigation system, a gifts registry, a conflict SharePoint. Takes a lot of manual pulling and joining of that data. So how do you each think about that side of the equation, taking digital transformation and leveraging it to help you do your job from a risk management perspective better? Maybe Natalia, maybe we can start with you this time.
Sure. So I definitely still consider myself, I think forever will be a novice at how we think about data and the myriad of ways in which we can leverage data. I think I'll just share, I've learned the value that there's no one way. And to not be, what's the saying? Good be the enemy of the perfect, or however it goes. In other words, I don't have to access every single system. Nobody's data is perfectly clean. And so looking at the economies of opportunity, what is achievable, going after, it's okay to start with a quick, small win and test that viability on what kind of insights that data pool might give you, and then make assessments on scaling up. I'm currently in an organization, my ABB family, with a very diverse system landscape, and that might provoke someone coming in to say, how do I approach this from a digitization perspective? I would say it's still achievable. Identifying segregation, identifying system pooling opportunities, identifying technologies in which to plug things together on the back of an 8+ year investment on an enterprise data analytics team. I'd say you can still make a highly decentralized environment opportunistically work for purposes of building an analytics portfolio for the business, including for integrity.
Yeah, again, Natalia, goes to your whole point of starting with that value add analysis of where are the, I guess, lowest hanging fruit of the highest value, and maybe starting from there and phasing those things in with pilots and things like that. So I don't know, Mauricio, Will, do either of you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add, and it's funny because not funny, but Natalia talks about the decentralization of her organization, and we fortunately, or at least people keep telling me that I'm fortunate that I don't have to deal with a decentralized system of databases. I'm still not convinced that I don't have to worry about that. I get that there are different challenges between the two. The reality for me, and I've said this on many occasions, is data can be very useful and it can be very dangerous, depending on how you deploy your analytics tools, why you're collecting it, what you're doing with it, and how you work with that data. And I think for many organizations, that question comes up repeatedly on, what do I want to do with it? And to me, that's the critical question. And Natalia is absolutely right, is that you can go for those small wins. You can find areas where there's value add in the short term and build on that. And to me, that's critical. And coming into the conversation and analysis on, almost going back to the bureaucratic process question we had before is, okay, here is a process that I have that's very manually focused, that takes a lot of hours to work through, and I'm not necessarily seeing the immediate results. Where can I use data in that process to try to A, get better results, B, make it more efficient, and C, overall better protect the organization and lower the risk to the company? And that's where we're focused, right? Where are there areas where we can plug data analytics tools in a particular process, a particular workflow, to modify and change how we go about risk analysis, risk tiering, triaging, and addressing those risks, as opposed to attempting to boil the ocean. And I think it's very hard to not want to boil the ocean when you're presented with tools that can give you everything. Well, but if you can't do much with everything, in my opinion, you're going backwards. So find those areas where you can deploy and get those quick wins and work on your efficiency and everything else all at the same time.
Yeah, great. Will, anything further from you?
You know, I think Mauricio said that perfectly well, is boiling the ocean and the dangerous and the benefit of data. I think one of the worst things you could do is collect all this data, have an issue, and then have a regulator or another body come in and say, but you had all this data. Why didn't you do something with it? Because you lack the tools, you lack the understanding to action on it. So I think in that regard, there's a big partnership with the business, and then there's a very surgical and tactical level execution and the mission and the values of the compliance function. What do we need to accomplish? Because, you know, I had an old commander that used to say, and it drove me nuts, but it makes sense, is the juice worth the squeeze? So you can run around and collect all these things and get all this sort of stuff, but if you're not putting it to meaningful use, what's the point? Why are you doing it? So I think that's where it falls back, is to have very structured, very codified, this is the mission and vision of what we're doing with this, and this is how we do it. And that will help shape how you partner with your business units to figure out what data needs to protect the company, what data is needed to help drive the business forward. And it'll also give you a roadmap and a game plan of how to work things. And that's not to say that there won't be roadblocks or headaches or things of that nature, but it'll give you that kind of focus versus having 42 different systems where you're pulling all this information in, and now you're left with all this data, but you don't know how to connect it. And I think you end up with the correlation versus causation, you know, the ice cream model, whereas murders go up in the summer, so do ice cream sales. So ipso facto, ice cream causes murders. If you're not surgical on your data, that's what it's going to look like. So you need to be very prescriptive and have a tactical level focus, and get those quick wins that really move the business forward without getting overwhelmed. And to Mauricio's point, attempting to boil the ocean just because you have the ability to do that.
Yeah, no, I think those are great points. And I think also touching on, you know, starting with that ideal end state, and we're going to talk about this in a lot more detail later, also potentially unlocks all sorts of other stakeholders who can buy into that approach, whether it's finance or audit or sourcing, who, now that you have the data for one end state use case, can, you know, probably see many other use cases internally that they can use, which obviously has a lot of benefits for cost sharing and all sorts of things like that. So we'll obviously dive into that. I think one very concrete area we want to definitely explore next is third-party risk management. I think each of you have some really, really innovative thoughts and approaches to third-party risk management that I think everyone will benefit from hearing. But, you know, third-party risk management, I think, continues to be one of the most challenging, vexing areas for compliance functions. You know, just look at ESG and supply chain disruption and all the things that have happened and emerged over the last year or so, just shows that the expectations continue to increase, but the approaches and technology and data are often very lagging in terms of where companies want to be. So I'd love to turn it over to each of you to kind of hear where you currently are, what you're thinking about in terms of a more kind of next gen sophisticated approach to third-party risk management. Maybe Will, I could start with you.
Sure, absolutely. And I think I had the misfortune, however you want to look at it, is taking a very manual diligence process and converting it into a fully automated process. And really that was economy of scale. You know, when I was with my previous company before we were acquired by Lonza, we had roughly 600 folks that we would have to do additional diligence on. Manual, absolutely a process. But when we were acquired, that number went up now to almost 30,000, which was just impossible from a manual process. So we really took a look at it and said, what do we need to ask? What is the key points of how we do this? And who are our business units going to be impacted? How is this going to be, you know, a force multiplier for them, but also kind of what steps we need to do? So it's really a matter of educating the business of this is what the process is going to be. So I think what we did in this thing is we looked at everything from a very holistic approach, and we said, here's the kitchen sink. Here is everything we would love to have. Okay, this is not where we're going to be able to get right now, because if we just executed on that, we would slow the business down. We would stop the business in some cases. So we took phased approaches and started pulling these phases out and saying, okay, here's how we're going to win this. And then working again, partnership with our ERP owners and the business owners in terms of getting a mindset of how this inner working worked, and then showing them what we were doing. So it was a true partnership in showing them that, you know, this is how it's going to flow through the system. These are the questions. This is the scoring. And then leveraging technology. As I said before, we went to 30,000 vendors. It is impossible unless you have an entire team that's going to go through and execute all this. So where do we leverage technology? We created a proprietary algorithm that would score the results of our questionnaires and allow us to identify and weed out issues where we didn't need to jump in, but at the same time, flag issues where we could go and say, okay, Here's where we need to have that manual review to check with the business. In a few cases, okay, we need to escalate it a little bit further. Is this a company we want to be doing business with? But it was really that marrying of technology, but with the manual process. So you don't have complete oversight where you hit a button and you walk away, but really it looked at what is the risk to the business? How do we best adjust that risk and do it in a phased approach? So you're just not slamming the door on everything at one time. And it really worked out well. Now it's a lot of work to get that done, but having it behind the scenes and automated really helps flow the process because it doesn't impact the business. And what's the business is going to jump up and down if you start shutting vendors down and things of that nature. But giving them that knowledge and having that relationship, when we did have to come to them to say, hey, here's an issue we have with the vendor, it was much more well received than just, oh, we have to do this because compliance said this. Now it's, we have to do this because this is the right thing to do. This is what's expected. This is what we do as a company across the board.
Great. And Will, I caught a reference to the ERP, how you worked with the ERP owners. And that's an area where, you know, when we talk to a lot of companies, compliance is still, and risk teams still sometimes operate in their silo as well. They're trying to solve a third-party questionnaire piece of the puzzle, stand something up and automate that. And they're not, sometimes not thinking about it as holistically in terms of where does what they want to achieve fit into a larger kind of ERP process.
Absolutely.
Can you share a little more detail in terms of kind of, it sounds like you've really thought about the end-to-end process, how you thought about that, who you worked with and kind of embedded?
I think the first thing we asked was, who do we need to ask what questions? Okay, who do we have in our system right now? Who is our vendors? What do we need to ask them? How are they coded? How are they corrected? So we worked with our master data team to say, what information do you have right now? If I went into SAP, which is our ERP system, and said, tell me about this vendor, tell me about this vendor, and then really marrying the mind that said, you know, this is what we want to achieve as an objective. What does the system offer right now? What do you have? Okay, now there was some customizations. We recognized in order for our system to work, we need to change a couple features here, change a few work features here, but having that knowledge and that back and forth and not just forcing something onto them. Because when we originally planned it out, if I had executed the way that the team had developed it, we would have slowed the system down completely because we weren't taking in consideration how the system was already worked. So we found the strengths, we found the weaknesses, we came together as a compromise and floated in. But there was that knowledge transfer of this is why we're doing this. So it was never, oh, just change this system in there and do it. And that's the end of the story. And then also engaging with the 600 so folks that are the actual ones that are inputting the data, and explaining and stressing to them the importance of this data and why we need this data and this process, so that when a system is blocked or a vendor is blocked, they know who to reach out for a question. We know who to follow through. So it really is that partnership, but taking a look at what you have right now and how it actually works, not how it's supposed to work, but how it actually is working right now. And once you have that understanding, it gives your roadmap a lot more clarity.
Wonderful. Great. Mauricio, do you want to dive in on the third-party risk management side?
Yeah, so I'll say I agree to all of those comments. Make that easy so I don't repeat on sort of the intake of third parties. Where I'm very focused on now, and I like the reference to the ERP systems and what data you already have, is, you know, oftentimes we'll do these due diligence exercises, and as I always tell my clients, and say this before I came to this role, that would ask me, well, doing due diligence means now that we're good, we're done, we're golden. We don't have to worry anymore. No, absolutely not. I can tell you on this day that these are the risks or not with that third party. Now the real work begins. And data analytics has a lot to play in that ongoing monitoring, the ability to understand how are we using third parties, where are we using third parties, what services are they providing, how are they billing, are there anomalies? All of that information that, you know, in a traditional old style program, you may look at in the course of an audit or a compliance review, as we might call it, or in a renewal due diligence. And those are just points in time reviews. What I am moving towards is a model in which you can do that on a regular basis in a manageable format. Again, you don't want to boil the ocean with the data, but what can you pull in? What can you use? What do we have access to that is relevant, reliable, and useful information to us, as well as the business and other stakeholders throughout the life cycle of that commercial relationship. So that is where I see a lot of opportunity for improvement within the third-party management space. with existing vendors or third-party relationships as well as new ones. So I'll leave it there because I could repeat all of what Will said on sort of the onboarding and the ESG and everything else that's coming in, what questions you want to ask. I think there's a lot of opportunity throughout the process, but from a data perspective and ongoing monitoring, to me, that's a key area of potential improvement that will help across the board.
Wonderful. Natalia, how about you to drive this topic home?
Sure. So agree with everything that was said. I would say what we're doing on the front end is, instead of thinking about that front end pre-engagement diligence as the protective barrier, and instead thinking of it as the funnel opportunity to define what is the lifecycle monitoring effort. So we're, with that in mind, dramatically changing what that front end engagement looks like, depending on the risk scoring pursuant to an algorithm of what that front end assessment looks like, not through questionnaires, but just attributes of the relationship. Then what kinds of activities are we going to engage in to make sure that we have the right proximity over the relationship to be navigating the associated risks of, that relationship over time. Leveraging data analytics in that journey is a must. Looking at things like a bevy of pricing attributes around margins and discounts and rebates and credit notes and so forth will foment further visibility and insights as we look at monitoring the life cycle of those relationships. So for us, it's got to be a mosaic approach. You're never going to want to replace in its entirety the human element of the contact with that relationship party. But we need to balance and make sure that we're not, as we shift away from an undue amount of historic emphasis on the front end and we shift to life cycle management, make sure that we get a balance between human relationship management, between data leverage, and then sort of proactive monitoring steps, whether that's contractual check-in, transaction testing, training check-in, awareness building, other kinds of things over that life cycle. Those are all things that we are designing now.
All right, wonderful. So I think you've all touched on some of these themes already, particularly in the third-party space: data analytics, predictive analytics, risk scoring, machine learning, and AI, which you haven't mentioned, but those are all sort of the hot topics right now in the ethics and compliance world. We've talked a little bit about that in the third-party space in the last few minutes, but I'd love to kind of zoom out a little bit to get your broader thoughts on those topics in connection with your overall program, how you're thinking about it today, how you're thinking about it in the near future. Maybe Natalia, if you could continue, that'd be great.
Sure. So in that space is where we are putting some concerted time over creating, dare I say, a bigger well or lake of data. So with the front end efficiencies that we talked about on digitizing smart process, that gives us available data sets. So whether we're talking about diligence, we're talking about gifts and entertainment, we're talking about conflicts of interest, all of the digitization of these necessary but smart processes provide us access to information that we are pooling together so that we can then run the monitoring, the additional aspect or facet of the monitoring side of our practice. My colleagues here have made great points about more data, not necessarily better. How do we think about what kind of data we're pulling in? How do we think about what kind of queries we're going to run against that data, both with the detective and ultimately wanting to move more into the preventative space? We are in design phase of that pool right now, but aiming at really taking sort of 100,000 foot, 300,000 foot perspectives on pockets of risk data, and let's see what kind of intelligence can we get. To Will's point, we certainly hope the juice is worth the squeeze by going after the right pools of data, if you will, and through machine learning and eventually what kind of AI gets deployed and trained over a data set like this will reveal how good the juice is, I think, over time.
Great. Will, Mauricio, anything you'd like to add, either or both of you?
I love the preventive aspect of this because, you know, we can be reactive if an issue has occurred, but if we can get ahead of an issue before, so something we're actively exploring is looking at that AI. So if I have a set of criteria that have been met, I get a notification before that says, hey, historically, conditions A, B, and C were met, and then we had issue D. Condition A has been met, condition B is partially met. Okay, let's proactively go there and find out what's going on. Is this going to be something? So I think that idea of getting into that preventive mindset is absolutely great. So being able to fix an issue and identify an issue is one thing, but if you can identify it before there's an issue and take steps to do, you know, proactive and, you know, remediation activities so it never becomes something, that is the desired end goal. And I know we're actively looking to see is how do we start piecing this information together to Natalia's point, by not having so much data that you're not able to use it, but at the same time, get ahead of something that had and have that trigger that's, hey, we've seen this before. Let's just make sure we're all the ducks in a row so we don't have it happen again.
Great. Mauricio, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, of course. So I agree with all of those comments. I'll continue the theme down the preventative path. Is a big aspect of what we need to do in our organizations to get ahead of it. And I'll tie back to the first question you asked, Parth, or maybe it was the second one, but sort of about the process development. And, you know, we went through an exercise last year on one of our particular risk areas. It was involving third parties, but it was broader than just that bucket. And one of the things that we used, again, we would have preferred to have a better data pool, a better lake than the data that we had, but was being able to analyze, okay, these are the 40, 50, 60 steps in this process that we have. Which of these were necessary and moved the needle with regards to the risk categories that we're attempting to achieve? So I think having had a better set of data would have assisted in that process. But at the end of the day, through that exercise, we identified that of you know, the dozen or so locations that were operating within that policy framework with one consistent policy document, they were executing in a dozen different ways. And part of the reason for that was because of attempting to use the data that they had or what they thought was the best way to execute. So we were able to take, by using the data and by taking the time, effort, and using the resources to really sit down and understand how do we prevent, what do we have, what works, and what can we deploy later, has radically changed the process for that particular risk area and made it far more efficient for the business. And in my opinion, strongly, significantly improved our risk control, despite the fact that we're not doing all of the stuff that we were doing before. So, you know, I think we're kind of repeating the value that data has, so long as you have the right data and you're able to have a plan on why you're collecting it and what you want to do to execute with it, will get you a long way.
All right, wonderful. So I think you guys have all set forth a real great view and vision into the what does good look like. So I want to spend a few minutes now talking about the how. So let's talk a little bit about internal company dynamics, resource constraints, matrices, politics. So you have a digital compliance vision today. How do you actually realize that through your corporate environment? You know, who are your allies? How do you partner with them effectively? And maybe more interestingly, who are your blockers or the folks that you have to convince to come along on that journey? So maybe Natalia, you want to grab that one?
Sure. So much of what Will said earlier, I mean, the allies we have the same mindset. Let's get as much leverage as possible over existing enterprise systems. Even if the enterprise systems were not at 100% utilization, let's go for some win. So things like Salesforce, you know, things like SAP Ariba on the buy side were key entrees into the digitization journey for us in my tenure in Integrity, whether it was diligence on revenue side relationships or diligence on spend side relationships. can't say enough about the partnership with internal audit. For my particular shop, our business analytics capabilities were created there almost a decade ago to find efficiencies and economies of scale and get smarter about efficient audit execution. And so I've got 4 relationships there who are dedicated to integrity business analytics, tapping that team, and the customization and the systems that they have built and intelligence over time of the business married with analytics capability is what is enabling me now to sort of put things into hyperdrive, leveraging all of that enterprise understanding. Somebody like me who comes in to the organization, without that prior knowledge and capability. So I think those are two things that have helped us. I think there's one data set we haven't talked about that I'll just mention briefly and then turn it to my partners here. There are other pools of data, right? And communications are equal opportunities of data. And so the levering of social media within our organization and how to look at the push and pull of communications for learning purposes and what is the data telling us about what's working and what's not working. We might be pushing some people out of comfort zones in terms of levering novel technologies, but that's also a key part of the digitization, if you will, of the efforts that we're undertaking and some of the change management that we're managing. Most compliance or integrity people not per se being communications experts, but we find ourselves kind of leading a lot of that charge.
Yeah, very fascinating. Will, how about you?
I think one of the things that we've always stressed is we'll never say no. If the business comes to us with something, is we won't say no right off the bat. We'll take a look at it and see how do we partner, how we work it together. And I think when you get out, and obviously with COVID, it's been a little bit more difficult to have these road shows and be able to do visits and things of that nature. But when you go out and saying, we're not here to tell you how to run your business, we're here to help you run the business in the best way possible. And you start getting these wins across the board in terms of taking a situation and being an asset to getting the business, being an asset to the success of that. And that goes up to the top, that goes to your EC, to your board. And when that sort kind of spreads, it's very contagious and you start having a lot of buy-in. Does this mean everybody wants to jump up and down and give you the resources to do your crazy project and things? No, but I think if you have that partnership and you truly come in and say, how do I help the business? How do I help drive this? What roadblocks are you having? Here's some experiences I have. That's really been beneficial in terms of when we need to get a project done. We're able to pull in cross-functional experts and they have the knowledge and the understanding of why we're doing it. So I think if you approach it with the mindset of because compliance says so, you're going to get a lot of resistance right off the bat because you're doing change. If you bring people into the fold and they start being part of the change and recognize why you're doing the change, you're going to get a lot more energy behind it. You're going to get a lot more assistance. And that just helps that when it goes to your board, when it goes to the EC and it's lauded as a great program and it shows results and everything else, and you're able to turn around and say, we couldn't have done it without X, Y, and Z group. It makes them look good. It just kind of spreads from there, continuing further. That's not to say that everybody's going to jump up and down at the opportunity, so to speak, of working with compliance on a project. But what we have found is that's very successful at kind of breaking down some of those politics and kind of having understanding. And instead of coming and saying, we need you to do X, really flipping the script and saying, how can we help you? How can ethics and compliance help you, help your business, help your team work with that? And I think that just kind of breaks down that barrier and allows you to just have an open, honest conversation. And then you can work in what you need, find what they need. And back to my ERP system is how it's supposed to work and how it actually works can be wildly different sometimes. But if you understand that, you're at a much better standing to jump in.
Great. Mauricio, anything like that?
Yeah, so I'm very lucky to be in an organization that has two things going right now that help compliance and us in the space. One is we're on the high-speed digitalization train. You can look at any of our public comments on that road. So as an organization, holistically, we are looking at all potential opportunities for digitalization. The second part is with regards to one of our core values of continuous improvement. So as an organization, we drive for areas of efficiency and improvement to better support the organization, to better support our customers, our shareholders and other stakeholders of the organization. And those two together in this particular space really opens the door for collaboration across the board. Now, you know, to Will's last point, or one of his points, it doesn't mean that everybody is going to jump for joy and be 100% on board with every project, every opportunity, every way of achieving it or looking at it. But there is a culture within the organization of working across stakeholders, with the business, with other support functions, to find ways to better serve our internal and external clients. So that has helped tremendously in being able to develop those relationships and to move forward. You know, if we pick specific departments, you know, internal audit, of course, we work very closely with. That relationship is absolutely key to everything that we do. Certainly in this particular space and area, working with supply chain and trying to understand and understanding what are the business objectives? What are they looking to achieve, not today, not tomorrow, but down the road, and make sure that we are being proactive in that space. Let's design our control mechanisms, our processes, our systems to risk mitigate for the organization, but with their strategic goals in mind. Trying to create a system that looks beautiful on paper that's completely devoid of what the organization is looking to achieve in the short, medium, and long term isn't going to get you many friends or buy-in from anybody. So always keeping that strategic mindset in place is key.
Thank you. So I think we have time for one last question, and I think each of you have already touched on this question some length already, but maybe you could each maybe bring together your thoughts just for some final pieces of advice to some of the listeners out there who are maybe very early in this thought process around digital transformation, or maybe they've started it and they're looking to figure out how they build momentum, show the return on investment, et cetera. Can each of you share maybe some final thoughts in terms of advice, key watch outs on how you continue on that journey? Maybe Natalia, I can turn it back to you.
Well, I would just say, you know, credit to our team that got this journey started years ago. The first analytic that was run that blew up positively our program was an analytic assessed around in the context of an investigation. And when the business saw what kind of risk profiling and assessment the analytic could do, it lit a fire in everybody's understanding about the business value. So it's not just about our space and the leverage there, but the business value and insights that these means of looking at information have to really detect a lot of what Mauricio was saying, which is business efficiency. Are you actually maximizing the squeeze, you know, of your business objective, coupled with the opportunity to mitigate risk, be more detective, and ultimately more preventative? It's all a big life cycle opportunity. And so I think there's a sales job for companies that are trying to assess how do we get started. These opportunities pay dividends across the whole of the organization.
Great. Mauricio?
Listen and be open to change. I think that if you're getting started on this process and you have a system that for all intents and purposes has served you well or seems to be working, you may be nervous to ruffle the feathers and go a different way. There will be things that you will agree with. There will be things that you will disagree with. But I think it's important to, you know, participate in these conversations, to talk to other colleagues in the industry on what has worked for them, what has not worked for them. I think we've all talked about good stories. I'm sure that if someone asked about, you know, horror stories, we might have some, or others will have some that it didn't go in exactly the direction we wanted to. So learn from that. And you know, don't be afraid to fight for change that ultimately serves your internal and external stakeholders as you start on this journey.
Okay, thanks, Mauricio. Will, we'll give you the final word.
Well, I hate to be the downer on the final word, but you're going to fail. You're going to hit roadblocks. It's not going to do what you want it to do. It's not going to give you the information you thought you were going to get. It's not going to give you the information that a business unit wants, something else like that. It's a evolving process. And Mauricio hit it the best is, I guarantee you, if anybody in the audience called anybody on the panel right now, we'd be happy to share, this worked for me, this didn't work for me across the board. So ask the questions and realize that it's not going to be a flip of a switch and then you walk away and done. It's a continually evolving process. And just keep driving at it. Just keep figuring out the next level, the next step across the board, but don't take the roadblocks or the misses or anything. Learn from them, apply it somewhere else. But like I said, it's just ask. I think everybody here, especially my panelists here, would also be willing to share, hey, this is what worked, this is what doesn't, and then customize it to what you need.
All right, thank you, Will. I think it's always good to leave on a note of realism. So wonderful. Well, first of all, thank you all three of you for the remarkable insights you shared today. I hope everyone, and I expect everyone's leaving with some nuggets of practical advice to take back to their teams to really continue or start that journey. Thank you to Ethisphere for hosting this. To echo Will's point, I think on behalf of all of us, we are all available to chat offline, benchmark, etc. So please do take those opportunities. I think we all, again, speaking for all of us, love to hear where companies are, hear about innovation, and share innovation from our perspective as well. So again, thank you to you three again, and thank you to Ethisphere.